never been easy. It had been a long, hard struggle to survive all these years on the pittance called parish relief that these men, in their long-tailed coats and carefully tied cravats, had handed out to her. "Lydia," said Betty, turning her attention back to her daughter, who was crushing a stray hairpin that had fallen onto the floor under the sole of her boot. "Thank the gentleman," she told her, in a tone that she hoped wouldn't meet with a refusal. There'd be trouble later, she knew, but if she could get Lydia out of the room without her spoiling all hope of improving her lot in life, then perhaps she would be able to talk some sense into her. "Thank you," mumbled Lydia, still without looking up. Betty hoped the men of the committee would interpret it as humility.
"What did she say?"
shouted Mr. Hamer again, cupping a hand around the back of his ear. "She said thank you," Betty told him in a raised voice.
"Should think so as well," he muttered. "We'll make the arrangements then," Mr. Hewitt told her. "You'll have to come back on Monday for the indenture to be signed, and we'll give her a ticket for the coach, and a bit of clothing if we can procure some," he added, frowning at the threadbare clothing that Lydia was dressed in. "She can't go like that," he went on, turning to his fellow committee members. "It'll reflect badly on us." "She could walk," suggested Mr. Lomax, glancing at Lydia, who, despite being underfed, gave off the impression of being strong. "She's too young to walk all that way alone," protested Betty. "And I'm not sure it's safe for a lass on her own." Mr. Hewitt nodded in agreement. "We'll pay for a seat on the mail coach," he told the committee firmly. "Outside seat, of course. I'm sure someone will meet her if we let the mail know to expect her," he added. Betty nodded and thanked him. She knew it was generous. "Come on," she said to Lydia, knowing it was too much to expect her daughter to thank the men again. Lydia needed no encouragement. She burst from the room like a gust of wind rattling the window panes. "I don't want to go," she repeated as soon as they were out of earshot of the committee. "They'll do as thou's told," Betty reprimanded her, feeling guilty for feigning anger. The truth was that she didn't want Lydia to go either, but she couldn't see any alternative. Their lives had been left in ruins since the judge at Lancaster sent Jimmy away for 7 years to New South Wales. Betty remembered how shocked she'd been when she received the news. She'd collapsed to the floor when the letter had been read out to her by the schoolmaster, and he'd had to run and fetch Anne Booth, her neighbour, to help her up. "Why?" she'd kept on asking him. "Why are they sending him away? He's done nought wrong." "Your husband was at the meeting up near the rope walk," the schoolmaster had said. "They're making an example of everyone who was caught there to put a stop to them causing any more trouble." "But he were never set on trouble," Betty had said. "He just wanted to know about trade and how to get fair money for his work. That's all." She remembered how she'd sobbed into her apron, and Anne had made a pot of tea and told her to shush because she was frightening the children. The image in Betty's mind, of the faces of Lydia and Simon and Rose staring up at her wide-eyed with fear, would never fade. She'd known that she was scaring them, but she'd been so afraid herself that she couldn't control the tears and the trembling until, in the end, Anne had shepherded them out and taken them to her own cottage, whilst Betty tried to calm herself. She'd never seen Jimmy again. She hadn't had the money to travel to say goodbye to him in the prison. All she'd been able to do was send a letter to the government, pleading for him, for leniency, and failing that, the chance to sail with him on the convict ship. But the answer had been no, as it had been to all the wives whose husbands had been sentenced to the same fate at Lancaster. They were to be left with no husbands to support them and their children, forced to throw themselves on the mercy of the parish guardians as they struggled to keep themselves and their families out of the workhouse. Jimmy had been a handloom weaver, like most of the men who lived at Tongue. Betty had been brought up as a spinner, but now that the spinning was being done in mills, there was no prospect of her getting work, and even less prospect of her daughters working beside her at their own spindles. There'd been so much change in recent years. The inventions of men with good intentions, like Sam Crompton.